This weekend, French voters go to the polls in an extraordinarily closely watched race between far-right challenger Marine Le Pen and incumbent Emmanuel Macron. We're joined now by Arthur Goldhammer, who's an analyst of French politics, a writer. He's been covering this race for the New Republic. Arthur also translated the now classic book, Thomas Piketty's Capital in the 21st Century. Arthur, welcome to Rising.
Good morning. Glad to be here.
So there was a debate on Wednesday night. What's your sense of how much that has changed this race? There was a lot of fear among Macron supporters that things were trending quite badly for him. How badly are those people feeling now?
I think they're feeling a little better now. You're quite right that the momentum seemed to be in Le Pen's favor. After the first round of the election, she'd come, according to some polls, within 2 or 3 points of Macron. So it was really getting into the red zone territory. Unlike in 2017, however, the debate did not provide a knockout opportunity for Macron. Le Pen held her own, although almost all commentators agree that she lost on points. Macron was a very good debater and a master of all the details of policy, as one would expect from a top-level graduate of France's most elite training institutions for the governmental leadership positions. He did quite well in the debate. He was a little more aggressive than expected. Usually the front runner is expected to lay back a bit, and the challenger attacks. Marine Le Pen, who had been on attack on the campaign trail, actually laid back, and Macron, contrary to expectations, came out punching. And as I said, most observers and an instant poll conducted right after the debate showed that he did very well. And currently, polls have him leading by as much as 10 points.
Something interesting about this matchup and this runoff is sort of the absence of the left. You have the center right against the right, or as Ryan said, the far right. So tell us about that dynamic and how that could affect, there was obviously the third sort of left candidate that attracted a lot of votes, a good chunk of votes before the runoff. How does that affect the dynamic when people go to the polls over the weekend?
What Macron did in 2017, aided by, it must be said, a very fortunate alignment of the stars, this wasn't all his doing, but he came out of nowhere and essentially absorbed the entire center of the French political spectrum, both the center-right and the center-left. He had been working for Francois Hollande, a president of the center-left, who became very unpopular by the end of his term. And Macron essentially occupied that space. When he won the election, he was immediately joined by a number of people who had been in Hollande's government, but also by people who had supported Alain Juppé, the most centrist of the right-wing opposition back in 2017. So that left no air in French politics except on the extremes. Marine Le Pen on the far right, where she was joined by a challenger, Éric Zemmour, who also came out of nowhere and at first seemed like he might be a real threat to Le Pen. He took away half of her vote. But the war in Ukraine intervened. Zemmour was an outspoken supporter of Putin, as was Le Pen before the invasion, but she changed her tune after the invasion, which she condemned. Zemmour refused to condemn the invasion and refused to welcome Ukrainian refugees into France. So he began to fade at that point, and she again became the dominant figure on the far right. On the far left, the other vacuum left by Macron's utter dominance of the center, Jean-Luc Mélenchon did better than expected in the first round. He got 22%. This was his third try for the presidency, and that was his high water mark. So the contest going into the final round is to see who can draw more of Mélenchon's supporters? And I think the answer is that Macron will, although many of Mélenchon's voters will abstain or cast blank votes in the second round.
And there was some criticism of some of the other left parties that that continued running, despite the fact that it appeared like Mélenchon had a shot at making it into the final two, and he ended up losing by just a hair, right? So has there been how has that reverberated in France?
It's true that in 2017, Mélenchon had forged an alliance with the Communist Party. He was unable to do that, or unwilling to do that, I think would be more accurate to say, this year. And the Communists ran their own candidate who got 2.5% of the vote. If they had forged an alliance, and assuming that 2.5% went to Mélenchon, he actually would have beat Marine Le Pen and made it to the second round. What he's doing now is a unique strategy. It's never been tried before. He's calling on his voters to, first of all, he told them not to vote for Le Pen. He did not say vote for Macron, but implicit in his call not to vote for Le Pen is a vote for Macron. But he's now asking his voters to turn out massively in the legislative elections, which will be held in June, and elect him prime minister. Now, actually, they can't do that because the president appoints the prime minister, who must then form a government and obtain a vote of confidence from the legislature. But he's hoping that somehow he'll force Macron's hand. I think that's highly unlikely. Mélenchon does not really have the support of 22% of the electorate. He got what the French like to call a useful vote. That is, voters on the left who really did not favor his policies nevertheless voted for him because he was the only left alternative. In the legislative elections, the other parties which lost badly at the national level still retain a base at the local level and will elect quite a number of deputies. So I don't think he'll have a majority sufficient to force Macron's hand.
And if Le Pen does pull off some upset here, and given the way that she has condemned the Russian invasion, how should people understand that a Le Pen win as it relates to Putin? Is it still a giant win for Putin and his kind of movement in Europe?
Absolutely, it would be a win of major magnitude for Putin. Despite her change of tune on the invasion itself, she still calls for France to withdraw from NATO. She's always been hostile to the EU. So she would split the two main alliances that are representing Europe in the support of Ukraine. As Macron aggressively pointed out in the debate, she has borrowed money from Russian banks because French banks would not lend to her. And Macron said, if you are in a position where you must negotiate with Putin, you'll be talking to your banker. You won't be talking as a head of state. You'll be talking as someone who owes Russian banks 15 million euros. So it would be a real blow to the alliance against Russia in the war in Ukraine.
Right. Well, Arthur, thanks so much for joining us.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
And we'll have more Rising right after this with Stephen Donziger.